The fluorescent lights buzzed in the empty corridor of Pinewood Police Department as Max, a 7-year-old German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, frantically clawed at the corner of the old storage room wall. His desperate whines escalated into urgent barks that echoed through the station's deserted hallways. Officer Frank Sullivan ran a weathered hand over his face, exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. 17 nights, 17 consecutive nights of the same behavior. "Easy, boy," Frank whispered, his voice hoarse with fatigue. His attempts to pull Max away only intensified the dog's determination, nails scraping against plaster with renewed urgency. Chief Donovan's ultimatum hung heavy in the air. "One more night of this, Sullivan, and that dog is finished. Dr. Richards already signed the retirement papers." Frank knelt beside his partner, noticing how the overhead lights caught the new gray hairs around Max's muzzle. "What are you trying to tell me?" "Buddy." Max locked eyes with Frank, then deliberately turned to scratch the wall again, a low whine building in his throat. In that moment, Frank made his decision. Whatever was driving his partner's obsession, Max deserved one last chance to show them. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Officer Frank Sullivan had spent 32 years with the Pinewood Police Department, the last 22 of those years working with K9 partners. At 58, retirement papers sat unsigned in his desk drawer. Since losing his wife Margaret to cancer 3 years ago, the job and Max had become his entire world. Max had come to the department 5 years earlier under difficult circumstances, rescued from an abusive home during a domestic violence call. The German shepherd had cowered in a corner, malnourished and distrustful. Something in those amber eyes had called to Frank, and against protocol, he'd taken the dog home that night, 6 months of rehabilitation later. Max had surprised everyone by qualifying for police training with exceptional scores. He'd become the department's most decorated K9 officer, with a perfect record for tracking missing persons and detecting narcotics. "That dog's got a sixth sense," Henry Watson, the night janitor, often remarked. At 72, Henry had cleaned the station's floors for nearly 4 decades, his arthritic hands still maintaining a firm grip on his mop. "Reminds me of my granddaddy's hunting dogs. They know things we don't." Until 3 weeks ago, no one would have questioned Max's abilities. Then the nighttime incidents began, the frantic pawing, the desperate barking, all focused on the same corner of the old storage room. Chief Margaret Maggie Donovan had been patient. Initially, at 61, with silver hair cut in a practical bob, she'd worked her way up from patrol officer to become Pinewood's first female chief. But patience had limits, especially with the city council cutting budgets quarterly. "I can't justify keeping a K9 that's showing signs of instability," she'd told Frank that morning. "Dr. Richards says it could be cognitive decline. We need reliability." "Frank, you know that." Dr. Valerie Richards, the department's contracted veterinarian, had examined Max thoroughly. "It could be canine cognitive dysfunction," she'd explained. "Similar to dementia in humans. The fixation on the storage room is concerning." The storage room itself hadn't been properly renovated since the flood of 2009, when water damage had necessitated repairs to several parts of the station. It now housed old case files, outdated equipment, and the occasional confiscated item waiting for processing. What troubled Frank most wasn't just the threat to Max's career, It was the desperation in his partner's behavior. Max wasn't simply acting out. He was trying to communicate something of urgent importance. Frank stood in the doorway of the storage room, watching as Max immediately raced to the corner and began his frantic pawing. The harsh overhead fluorescence cast stark shadows across the room, illuminating dust particles that swirled in the air with each of Max's movements. "Last chance, buddy," Frank murmured, his voice low and gentle. "Show me what's got you so worked up." He knelt beside Max, running a hand along the dog's back, feeling the tension in the muscles beneath the thick fur. Max paused momentarily, turning to lock eyes with Frank before returning his attention to the wall with even greater urgency. "Mind if I join you?" Frank turned to see Officer Jenny Martinez standing in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, holding 2 cups of coffee. At 34, Jenny was one of the department's rising stars, sharp, tech-savvy, and one of the few officers who hadn't written Max off as a lost cause. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, handing Frank a steaming cup. "Figured you might be here." Frank accepted the coffee gratefully. "He's been at it for nearly an hour now. Same spot, same behavior." Jenny crossed the room, crouching beside Max to examine the wall more closely. "You know, there's something different about this section." Her fingers traced the baseboard where Max had been scratching. "The paint doesn't quite match." Frank moved closer, seeing what had escaped his tired eyes. The corner section was indeed a slightly different shade, barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it. "Huh," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Never noticed that before." Max whined, pawing at the spot with renewed determination. The storage room door creaked open wider as Henry Watson shuffled in, leaning on his mop. Dog still at it. "Huh." The janitor's weathered face creased with curiosity. "Henry, you've been here forever. Here." "Do you remember anything about this wall?" Frank asked, gesturing to the corner. Henry adjusted his glasses, moving closer. "Well now, that section was redone after the big flood in '09. Lot of water damage in this wing. They had to tear out some sections down to the studs." 2009, Jenny repeated thoughtfully. "Wasn't that during the Starlight Killer investigation?" Frank felt a chill run through him. "Yeah, one of the darkest cases in department history. 3 little girls taken." Henry shook his head sadly. "Only found 2 of them. The suspect walked free. Detective Reynolds took it real hard. Committed suicide a week after the trial." Max barked sharply, as if confirming the connection. "What if—" Jenny hesitated. "What if there's something in that wall?" Frank considered the implications. Department property damage wasn't taken lightly, especially with the budget cuts. If they found nothing, it would seal Max's fate and possibly impact Frank's standing as well. "Got a flashlight?" "Henry," Frank asked finally. The janitor produced a heavy-duty flashlight from his cart. Frank examined the wall more carefully, running his fingers along the baseboard where the paint colors subtly changed. There was a slight indentation, barely perceptible. "If I lose my job over this, I'm blaming you," Frank told Max, who wagged his tail in response. "I'll take responsibility." Jenny offered. "I can say it was my idea." Frank shook his head. "No need for both of us to go down. Besides, Max and I are already on thin ice." He took out his pocket knife and carefully pried at the baseboard. It came away more easily than expected, revealing a section of drywall that appeared newer than the surrounding area. "Henry, you got any tools that could help us look behind this without tearing up the whole wall?" Henry returned minutes later with a small inspection camera attached to a flexible cable, the kind maintenance used to look inside walls and pipes. "Borrowed this from maintenance last week for a clogged drain. Never returned it," he admitted with a mischievous smile. Jenny connected the camera to her phone, then carefully fed the cable into a small hole they'd made in the drywall. Max watched intently, his entire body vibrating with anticipation. "I'm seeing something," Jenny said, angling her phone so Frank could see. "There's definitely something back there." The small screen showed a metallic object, rectangular and solid, wedged between two studs. "That's no random debris," Frank muttered. The decision was made in seconds. Using tools from Henry's cart, they carefully cut a section of drywall, creating an opening large enough to reach inside. Max paced anxiously, letting out occasional whines. Frank reached into the wall cavity, his fingers closing around cold metal. He carefully extracted a lockbox, roughly the size of a thick textbook, covered in a fine layer of dust. "My God," Jenny whispered. The box was heavy, sealed with a combination lock. No markings indicated its ownership or contents, but a small engraved TR on the bottom caught Frank's eye. "Thomas Reynolds," he said quietly. Max nudged the box with his nose, then looked up at Frank with what could only be described as vindication in his amber eyes. "I need to call the chief," Frank said, pulling out his phone. "Max, old boy, you might have just saved your career or ended mine." Chief Margaret Donovan arrived at the station 30 minutes later, her silver hair disheveled and her expression thunderous. She wore jeans and a Pinewood PD sweatshirt, clearly having dressed in haste. "This better be worth dragging me out of bed at 2 a.m. "Sullivan," she said, crossing her arms as she surveyed the hole in the storage room wall. Frank stood his ground. "Max, found something. Chief, something that was deliberately hidden." The lockbox sat on a folding table in the center of the room, still unopened. Max hadn't left its side, his attention fixed on the mysterious container. "And you decided property damage was the appropriate response to your dog's behavior." Chief Donovan's voice was controlled, but Frank recognized the undercurrent of anger. "With all due respect, Chief, I made a judgment call," Frank replied. "And I believe it was the right one." Jenny stepped forward. "The box has Thomas Reynolds' initials on it. Chief, it was hidden inside the wall that was repaired after the 2009 flood." At the mention of Reynolds' name, something shifted in the chief's expression. Thomas Reynolds had been a legend in the department, a dedicated detective whose apparent suicide had shocked everyone. The timing, just after the collapse of the Starlight Killer case, had seemed tragic, but not entirely surprising given the pressure he'd been under. "Have you opened it?" Donovan asked, her tone softening slightly. "No, ma'am. We wanted you present," Frank answered. Chief Donovan examined the box. "We'll need to document this properly. Jenny, get the camera. Henry, thank you for your assistance. But I'll need you to return to your regular duties now." Henry nodded reluctantly, casting a last curious glance at the box before shuffling out. "And call Diane from evidence," the chief continued. We need a proper chain of custody established. Within the hour, the storage room had been transformed into an impromptu evidence processing area. Diane Morris, the head of the evidence department, arrived with proper documentation forms and gloves for everyone. Combination lock, Diane observed. Old school, we could cut it, but that might damage potential evidence inside. Let me try something first, Frank said. He knelt beside the box, studying the lock. Reynolds' badge number was 4923. He used it for everything. Frank carefully turned the dial, 4 right, 9 left, 2 right, 3 left. The lock clicked open. How did you know that? Jenny asked, impressed. Reynolds was my field training officer when I joined the force, Frank explained, a hint of sadness in his voice. Some things you don't forget. Chief Donovan nodded to Diane. Document everything as we proceed. With gloved hands, Diane lifted the lid of the lockbox. The room fell silent as they stared at the contents. Inside were neatly organized evidence bags, each labeled in Detective Reynolds's precise handwriting. Photos of 3 young girls, Emma Collins, Rebecca Taylor, and Melissa Adams, the victims in the Starlight Killer case. DNA samples, a small leather-bound journal. Most disturbingly, 3 silver lockets containing wisps of blonde hair, each engraved with one of the girls' names. This is the missing evidence, Chief Donovan whispered, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking. The evidence that disappeared before Howard Westfield's trial. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. Howard Westfield had been the primary suspect in the Starlight Killer case, a wealthy businessman with connections throughout Pinewood. Despite substantial circumstantial evidence, the case had fallen apart when key physical evidence vanished from the evidence room days before the trial. Without it, the prosecution had been forced to drop the most serious charges. Westfield had walked free, moving to the next county where he'd continued to build his business empire. Someone deliberately hid this evidence, Jenny said, stating what they were all thinking. Someone inside the department, Frank added grimly. Max whined softly, nudging one of the evidence bags containing the silver lockets. His behavior had changed, the frantic energy replaced by a solemn vigilance. The question is, why did Reynolds hide it instead of reporting the theft? Diane asked. Maybe he didn't know who to trust, Frank suggested. If he suspected someone in the department was compromised. Chief Donovan straightened her shoulders. Decision made. This stays between us for now. No reports filed. No discussions with anyone else until we know more. Chief, Jenny questioned, surprised. If someone in this department buried evidence 15 years ago, they might still be here. Donovan explained, and they won't be happy about this discovery. She turned to Frank. Sullivan. As of this moment, you and Max are reassigned. Your new case is to find out what happened to the original investigation and why this evidence was hidden. Frank nodded, feeling a mixture of vindication and apprehension. What about Max's retirement? Postponed, obviously, Donovan said with a hint of a smile. That dog just proved he's sharper than half my detectives. Max's tail wagged as if he understood. Martinez, you'll partner with Sullivan. Your technical skills will be valuable. And frankly, I need someone who can keep him from going rogue. Jenny straightened. Yes, ma'am. I want daily reports, but keep them verbal. Nothing in writing. Nothing in the system until we know who we can trust." The chief's expression was grave. "And I want to speak with Samuel Cooper first thing tomorrow." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Sam Cooper? He retired years ago." "Cooper was Reynolds' partner on the Starlight case," Donovan explained. "If anyone might know what Reynolds was thinking, it's him." As they carefully repackaged the evidence, Frank noticed something else at the bottom of the box, a flash drive taped to a note that simply read, "Insurance." "Chief," he said, holding it up. Donovan took it, her expression grim. "We'll need a secure computer to check this, not one connected to the department network." As the impromptu meeting broke up, Frank found himself alone with Max in the corridor. He knelt beside his partner, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You knew all along, didn't you? Boy, you could smell something we couldn't see." Max leaned into Frank's touch, his earlier distress replaced with the calm alertness that had made him such an exceptional police dog. Back in his cramped office, Frank pulled out the retirement papers for both himself and Max, staring at them for a long moment before feeding them through the shredder. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. In the darkness of his car as he drove home, a memory surfaced. Thomas Reynolds, 2 days before his death, pulling Frank aside in the parking lot. "Not everything is what it seems. Sullivan," he'd said. "Remember that." At the time, Frank had attributed it to the stress of the case. Now, he wondered if it had been a warning. Max sat in the passenger seat, his attention fixed on the road ahead, as if he too sensed that their journey was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across Frank's kitchen as he prepared Max's breakfast. The German Shepherd watched patiently from his cushioned bed in the corner, his amber eyes alert despite their early start. Last night's discovery had changed everything, breathing new purpose into both their careers. Frank's phone rang. Jenny Martinez calling. "I've got Cooper's address," she said without preamble. "He's living in a cabin about 40 minutes outside town. Chief Donovan spoke with him this morning, and he's expecting us at 11. "Good work," Frank replied. "I've been looking through my old notes on the Starlight case. Some of it's coming back to me. But I was still in patrol back then, not privy to the investigation details." "I pulled what I could from the archives," Jenny said. 3 girls between ages 8 and 10 disappeared over a 6-week period in spring 2009. Emma Collins and Rebecca Taylor were found murdered. Melissa Adams was never found. Frank remembered the community's fear, the way parents had stopped letting their children play outside. What about the survivor? There was a girl who escaped, wasn't there? Lily Patterson, Jenny confirmed. She was 8 at the time, nearly became the 4th victim but managed to escape and identify Westfield by a distinctive star tattoo on his forearm. Her testimony wasn't enough, Frank recalled. Without the physical evidence, it came down to the word of an 8-year-old traumatized girl against a respected businessman. The defense painted her as confused, suggested she'd been coached. Frank felt a familiar anger rising. "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Bring everything you've gathered." As Frank drove through Pinewood with Jenny in the passenger seat and Max in the back, he was struck by how much the town had changed in 15 years. New housing developments sprawled where forests had once stood, many built by Westfield Properties. The man they'd failed to convict had literally reshaped the town. "I've been thinking about who at the department might have been involved," Jenny said, scrolling through personnel records on her tablet. From the original investigation team, only 3 officers still work for Pinewood PD: Deputy Chief Robert Blackwood, Lieutenant Mark Simmons, and Sergeant Patricia Wells. Blackwood was a detective back then, right? Frank asked, vaguely recalling a younger, ambitious officer who'd risen quickly through the ranks. Yes, though he wasn't lead on the case. That was Reynolds and Cooper. Jenny hesitated. There's something else. Blackwood and Westfield both belong to the same country club. Have for years. Frank absorbed this information silently. Robert Blackwood was now second in command at the department, positioned to take over when Chief Donovan retired next year. If he was involved in evidence tampering 15 years ago, this investigation could tear the department apart. Samuel Cooper's cabin sat on the edge of Pinewood Lake, a modest structure with a wraparound porch and a dock extending into the clear water. A man in his mid-60s sat in a rocking chair, a fishing rod propped against the railing beside him. His once powerful frame had grown lean with age, but his eyes were sharp as he watched them approach. "Sullivan," Cooper acknowledged with a nod. "Been a while." "Thank you for seeing us, Detective Cooper," Frank said, still using the title out of respect. "Just Sam now," Cooper corrected, gesturing to chairs on the porch. "And this must be Officer Martinez. Maggie told me you'd be coming." His gaze shifted to Max, who stood alertly beside Frank. "That's a fine-looking partner you've got." Max approached Cooper cautiously, sniffing his extended hand before allowing the retired detective to pat his head. "He's got good instincts," Cooper observed. "Better than most humans I've known." Once they were seated, Frank came straight to the point. "We found Thomas Reynolds' hidden evidence lockbox." Cooper's weathered face revealed nothing, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair, where, inside a wall at the station, the storage room that was renovated after the flood, Cooper closed his eyes briefly. Tom always was careful, too careful for his own good. "Did you know," Jenny asked directly, "that he hid the evidence?" Cooper stared out at the lake for a long moment. "I suspected." Tom became paranoid toward the end of the investigation, started keeping duplicate records, taking photos of evidence, said he didn't trust the system. He sighed heavily. The day the evidence disappeared, he wasn't surprised, almost like he'd been expecting it. "Why didn't he come forward?" Frank pressed. "He tried, went to the chief, then to Internal Affairs. No one would listen, not without proof. Then he started receiving threats." Cooper's voice hardened. "Not against himself, against his family. He had a daughter in college." Frank felt a chill. "And you never believed he committed suicide?" "Never," Cooper said firmly. "Tom was a lot of things, but suicidal wasn't one of them. He was angry, determined. The night before he died, he told me he'd found something that would break the case wide open." Cooper leaned forward. "Then suddenly, he's found with his service weapon in his hand and a bullet in his head. No suicide note, no warning signs. I didn't buy it then. And I don't buy it now." "Why didn't you pursue it?" Jenny asked. Cooper's expression darkened. "I tried. Hit nothing but walls. Then my wife's car was run off the road, an accident, they said. She spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The message was clear." He looked at them intently. Whoever was protecting Westfield had reach inside and outside the department. Max suddenly stood, his attention focused on Cooper's tackle box near the door. The dog walked over to it, sniffing intently. "Curious fellow, isn't he?" Cooper remarked. Frank watched Max's behavior with interest. "He has a nose for evidence. What's in the tackle box?" Cooper hesitated, then nodded. "Something I've kept all these years. Maybe it's time it saw the light of day." He retrieved the box and opened it, removing a false bottom to reveal a manila folder. My own insurance policy, copies of case notes, photos of evidence before it disappeared, witness statements that somehow never made it into the official record. Jenny looked through the materials, her expression growing increasingly disturbed. "There are witness statements here placing Westfield near each abduction site, details about his vehicle that match Lily Patterson's description. Why wasn't this in the case file?" "Because someone was sanitizing the file," Cooper said grimly. "Removing anything that pointed too directly at Westfield." Frank's phone buzzed with a text from Chief Donovan. "Need you back at station. Development in the case." "We have to go," Frank said, showing Cooper the message. Cooper nodded. "Take the folder. It might help. But watch yourselves. If this is coming to light now, someone's going to work very hard to bury it again." As they drove back to Pinewood, Frank mulled over Cooper's words. "We need to talk to the families, especially Sarah Collins, Emma's mother. She was the most vocal about the investigation being mishandled." "She still lives in Pinewood," Jenny confirmed. "Works as a nurse at County General." Back at the station, Chief Donovan was waiting in her office with a grave expression. "Close the door," she instructed as they entered. Once they were seated, she pushed a folder across her desk. "The flash drive you found had encrypted files. I had a trusted tech specialist crack them this morning." She paused. "It's worse than we thought." Inside the folder were financial records showing payments from an offshore account to a Pinewood PD account holder identified only by the number 647. "Officer badge numbers didn't go that high in 2009, Frank observed. "No," Donovan agreed, "but employee ID numbers did. I checked. 647 was Robert Blackwood." Frank felt the weight of this revelation. Blackwood was on the take. "It appears so. Regular payments starting 3 months before the evidence disappeared and continuing for 2 years afterward." "Where is Blackwood now?" Jenny asked. "Conference in Albany. Due back tomorrow." Chief Donovan's expression was resolute. "I want this handled carefully. We gather evidence, build a case, and make sure it's airtight before we make any accusations." Frank nodded. "We should talk to Sarah Collins first, then try to locate Lily Patterson." "Patterson left town years ago," Donovan said. "Last I heard, she was in Colorado, but Sarah still attends the memorial service every year." As they left the chief's office, Deputy Chief Blackwood's assistant, Carol, approached them. "Officer Sullivan, there's a Howard Westfield on the phone for you. Says it's urgent." Frank and Jenny exchanged alarmed glances. How could Westfield possibly know about their investigation already? "Put him through to my office," Frank decided, motioning for Jenny to join him. He put the call on speaker. "This is Officer Sullivan." "Officer," Westfield's smooth voice came through clearly. "I understand you've been asking questions about an old case. My case." Frank kept his voice neutral. "Mr. Westfield, I'm not sure what you're referring to." A dry chuckle. "Please, let's not waste each other's time. Pinewood is a small town. Officer Sullivan, word travels. I simply wanted to extend an invitation. If you have questions, why not come directly to the source? I'm hosting a charity fundraiser at my estate this evening, 7 o'clock. You and your partner are welcome to attend." After the call ended, Jenny looked troubled. "How did he know we haven't interviewed anyone yet?" "Someone tipped him off," Frank said grimly. "The question is, who Sarah Collins lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Pinewood. At 49, her blonde hair had dulled to ash, deep lines etched around eyes that had seen too much sorrow. She invited them in without surprise, as if she'd been expecting them for years. "So you've reopened the case," she said, as she served them coffee in a small, tidy living room dominated by photos of her daughter Emma. The largest showed a smiling 9-year-old with blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. "New evidence has come to light," Frank explained carefully. "We're reviewing the original investigation." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "I knew something wasn't right. The way evidence just vanished. How quickly they pushed to close the case." Her gaze hardened. "And then Detective Reynolds died." "That was no coincidence." "You maintained contact with Detective Reynolds during the investigation?" Jenny asked. "He was the only one who seemed truly committed to finding justice for Emma. He came to me the day before he died, said he had found something that would change everything." Her voice broke. The next day, he was gone. Max, who had been lying quietly at Frank's feet, suddenly raised his head, looking intently at Sarah. "May I ask what happened to your daughter's personal effects?" Frank asked, watching Max's reaction. "The items she had with her when she disappeared. The department returned most of them after the case closed. Her backpack, clothes." Sarah's voice faltered. "Her locket was never found. I gave it to her for her 9th birthday, just a month before. It had her initial and a small photo of our family inside." Max stood and walked to Sarah, placing his head gently on her lap. She seemed surprised, but began stroking his fur. "He can sense your grief," Frank explained softly. "He's very empathetic." Sarah wiped away a tear. "You know, Emma always wanted a dog. We were going to get one for Christmas that year." As they prepared to leave, Sarah retrieved a box from a hallway closet. "I've kept everything from the investigation, news clippings, the police reports they gave me, my own notes. Maybe there's something here that could help." Jenny accepted the box. "Thank you. We'll take good care of these. Just find who killed my daughter," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, "and why they were protected." In the car, Frank checked the time. "The fundraiser at Westfields starts in 3 hours. "Are we really going to walk into the lion's den?" Jenny asked. "It's a public event. Besides, I want to see his reaction when he realizes we have the evidence." Frank glanced at Max in the rearview mirror. "And I want to see how Max reacts to him." "Speaking of Max," Jenny said, "did you notice how he responded when Sarah mentioned her daughter's locket?" Frank nodded thoughtfully. "One of the items in Reynolds' lockbox was a silver locket with Emma's name engraved on it. I'm betting if we open it, we'll find her initial and a family photo inside." Back at the station, they began methodically going through Sarah's box of materials alongside Cooper's folder and the newly discovered evidence. Patterns emerged, witness statements that had been altered in the official record, leads that were never followed, connections between Westfield and potential accomplices that had been overlooked. "Look at this," Jenny said, pointing to a newspaper photo from the time of the investigation. It showed Westfield at a charity event, standing alongside several community leaders. In the background, barely visible, was a younger Robert Blackwood, not in uniform but clearly recognizable. The article says this was taken 2 months before the first abduction. Blackwood claimed in his statements that he'd never met Westfield before the investigation. Frank studied the photo. So he lied. The question is, why was he already on Westfield's payroll? Or did that come later? Jenny continued, digging through digital records. Westfield's company nearly went bankrupt in 2008. Then, suddenly in mid-2009, right after the case collapsed, he secured major development contracts with the city. The Planning Commission minutes show that then-Councilman Richard Hayes was his biggest supporter. Hayes any relation to Officer Daniel Hayes? His father, Jenny confirmed, currently serving as county commissioner. The web of connections was growing more complex. Westfield, Blackwood, the Hayes family, all linked, all potentially involved in covering up the truth about 3 murdered girls. As they prepared for the fundraiser, Frank briefed Max as if the dog could understand every word. "We're walking into a dangerous situation tonight. Buddy, I need you to be alert, but subtle. No making a scene unless I give the signal." Max's steady gaze seemed to convey understanding. The Westfield estate sprawled across 10 manicured acres on Pinewood's north side, a mansion that showcased the wealth its owner had accumulated since his acquittal. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway as Pinewood's elite arrived for the fundraiser, ostensibly supporting children's literacy. An irony not lost on Frank. "Officer Sullivan," Howard Westfield greeted them at the entrance, a glass of champagne in his manicured hand. At 62, he remained fit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And Officer Martinez, I'm so pleased you accepted my invitation." Frank maintained a professional demeanor. "Mr. Westfield, thank you for including us." Westfield's gaze dropped to Max, who stood alertly at Frank's side. "I wasn't aware this was a pet-friendly event. Max is a working police dog," Frank explained. "He goes where I go." "Of course." Westfield's smile tightened. "Please enjoy the event. Perhaps we can speak privately later." As Westfield moved away to greet other guests, Jenny murmured, "He's wearing long sleeves in 80-degree weather," covering the star tattoo Lily Patterson described. Frank agreed quietly. They circulated through the party, noting who interacted with Westfield, who seemed comfortable in this environment of wealth and power. County Commissioner Richard Hayes was in attendance. As were several current and former city officials, Max remained vigilant, his behavior unremarkable to casual observers but telling to Frank. The dog's subtle reactions, a tensing of muscles, a shift in attention helped identify people of interest. "Officer Sullivan," a woman's voice called. Frank turned to see Patricia Wells, one of the sergeants who had worked on the original case, now in her 50s. She had the wary eyes of someone who had seen too much. "Sergeant Wells," Frank acknowledged. "I'm surprised to see you here." "My husband sits on the library board," she explained, though her expression suggested discomfort. "I didn't expect to see you, especially with your partner." She nodded toward Max. "We received a personal invitation from Mr. Westfield." Something flickered in Wells' eyes. "Be careful. Sullivan, this isn't a simple charity event. There are currents running beneath the surface here." Before Frank could press for more information, Westfield appeared at his elbow. "Officer Sullivan, Might I have that private word now? My study's just down the hall. Frank glanced at Jenny, a silent communication passing between them. Lead the way, he said to Westfield. My partner comes with me. Both partners? Westfield asked, eyeing Max with thinly veiled distaste. Both, Frank confirmed firmly. Westfield's study was a showcase of his success awards and photos with influential figures lined the walls. Rare books filled custom shelves, and an antique desk dominated the center of the room. I'll be direct, officer, Westfield said once the door closed behind them. I understand you've discovered some evidence related to that unfortunate case from years ago. Frank maintained a neutral expression. What makes you think that, as I said, Pinewood is a small town? Westfield swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Let me be clear. Reopening old wounds serves no one. That case was properly adjudicated. I was exonerated. Evidence disappeared, Frank countered. That's not exoneration, Mr. Westfield. That's a miscarriage of justice. A flash of anger crossed Westfield's face before his smooth mask returned. Allegations without proof. Is that why you're here, hoping to provoke me into some kind of confession? Max had been quietly exploring the study, sniffing around the perimeter. He suddenly stopped at a bookcase, his attention fixed on a lower shelf. Your dog seems interested in my first edition Hemingway, Westfield observed coldly. Perhaps you should control him better. Frank watched as Max pawed gently at the shelf. He's not interested in the books, Frank said, moving to examine what had caught Max's attention. Behind a row of leather-bound volumes was a small recess. Frank reached in carefully and extracted a silver object, a locket, identical to the ones found in Reynolds' lockbox. Westfield's composed demeanor cracked as Frank held up the silver locket, the small heart-shaped pendant catching the light. That's private property, he snapped, reaching for it. Frank stepped back, keeping the locket out of reach. This appears to be evidence in an ongoing investigation. Mr. Westfield, you have no warrant, no right to search my property. Westfield's voice had lost its smoothness, an edge of panic breaking through. This is an invasion of privacy. Interesting that you'd keep a little girl's locket hidden behind your books, Jenny observed, her phone already out, documenting the discovery. Especially one that belonged to Melissa Adams, the victim whose body was never found. Max stood at attention, a low growl building in his throat as he watched Westfield. The dog's posture had changed completely, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the man with an intensity that spoke of recognition. You have no proof of that ridiculous claim, Westfield said, attempting to regain his composure. He moved toward his desk, his right hand drifting toward the drawer. This has gone far enough. I'm calling my attorney. In one fluid motion, Frank handed the locket to Jenny and placed himself between Westfield and the desk. Keep your hands where I can see them, Mr. Westfield. The door to the study opened suddenly, and Patricia Wells stepped in. Everything all right in here? The guests are asking for their host. Her hand rested casually near her concealed service weapon. The tension in the room was palpable. Westfield seized the momentary distraction. Sergeant Wells, these officers are harassing me and illegally searching my property. Please escort them out. Wells assessed the situation quickly, her gaze moving from the locket in Jenny's hand to Max's aggressive stance toward Westfield. Something shifted in her expression, resolution replacing uncertainty. "Mr. Westfield, I think it would be best if you stepped away from the desk," she said quietly. Westfield's face contorted with rage. "You too! After everything we've done for you!" His hand darted to the desk drawer, yanking it open. "Gun!" Frank shouted, lunging forward as Westfield grabbed a small pistol from the drawer. What happened next unfolded in seconds that seemed to stretch into minutes. Frank tackled Westfield, the impact sending them both crashing into a bookshelf. The gun discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space. Jenny drew her weapon, moving to cover Frank. Max, responding to the threat to his partner, launched himself toward Westfield with a ferocious bark. "Max, hold!" Frank commanded, struggling to subdue Westfield, who fought with unexpected strength for a man in his 60s. Max stopped instantly, maintaining an intimidating position just feet from Westfield, teeth bared, ready to protect his handler. Sergeant Wells had her weapon drawn as well, aimed steadily at Westfield. "Don't move," she ordered. "It's over. Howard." The study door burst open again as security personnel responded to the gunshot. The scene they encountered 3 police officers with weapons drawn and a snarling police dog surrounding their employer brought them to an immediate halt. "Police business," Wells announced firmly. "Call Pinewood PD for backup. Now." As Frank secured handcuffs on Westfield, he felt a sudden wetness soaking through his shirt. Looking down, he realized the gunshot hadn't gone wild. A spreading crimson stain on his left side indicated where the bullet had found its mark. "Officer down." Jenny's voice seemed to come from far away as Frank's vision began to blur. "We need an ambulance." The next few minutes passed in a haze of activity. Frank was vaguely aware of being lowered to the floor, pressure applied to his wound. Max's concerned whining penetrated the fog descending over him, the dog trying desperately to reach his fallen partner despite Jenny's efforts to hold him back. "Let him through," Frank managed to say, his voice barely audible. Max rushed to Frank's side, gently pressing his muzzle against his partner's hand. His amber eyes filled with what could only be described as fear. "Good boy," Frank whispered as darkness closed in. "You were right all along." The steady beeping of hospital monitors greeted Frank as he drifted back to consciousness. The sterile white ceiling came into focus first, then Chief Donovan's concerned face hovering above him. "Welcome back, Sullivan," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You gave us quite a scare." Frank's throat felt like sandpaper. "Max," he croaked. "Your partner's fine. Officer Martinez has been taking care of him." Chief Donovan helped him sip water through a straw. "The bullet missed any vital organs, but you lost a lot of blood. Doctors say you'll make a full recovery with time." The events at Westfield's estate came rushing back. Westfield, in custody. The locket was just the beginning. Donovan's expression hardened. "Once we had cause for search warrants, evidence started pouring in. We found a hidden room in the basement of his lake house photos. Trophies from victims, detailed journals, DNA evidence. It's worse than we imagined. Frank struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his side. "What about Blackwood?" "That's where things got interesting. When Westfield realized he was cornered, he started talking, trying to cut a deal. He implicated Robert Blackwood in the evidence tampering, claimed Blackwood approached him with the offer to make evidence disappear in exchange for money and future considerations. Do you believe him? Donovan sighed heavily. The financial records support his story. When Blackwood returned from Albany, we were waiting. He's in custody, too, along with County Commissioner Hayes. This thing goes deeper than we thought. Frank, corruption, blackmail, a network of protection that's been operating for years. A soft knock interrupted them. Jenny Martinez stood in the doorway, and beside her, tail wagging furiously, was Max. "Look who came to visit," Jenny said with a smile. Max approached the bed cautiously, seeming to sense Frank's fragile state. The dog gently rested his head on the edge of the mattress, his amber eyes never leaving Frank's face. "Hey, partner," Frank said softly, reaching out to scratch behind Max's ears. "Good work out there." Chief Donovan stood. "I'll give you some time with your visitors. We'll talk more when you're stronger." As she left, Jenny took the chair beside Frank's bed. "You should see the station. It's chaos. Internal Affairs has taken over half the building. 3 more arrests this morning, including Officer Daniel Hayes. Turns out the corruption was a family business." Frank absorbed this information, his hand still resting on Max's head. "What about the case, the victims?" Jenny's expression softened. "Sarah Collins came to the station when she heard about Westfield's arrest. I've never seen someone cry and smile at the same time like that." She paused. "And based on information from Westfield's journals, they've started searching for Melissa Adams' remains. They think they might finally bring her home. And Lily Patterson. Flying in tomorrow. She wants to make a formal statement, now that she's an adult. Says she remembers more than she was able to articulate as a child." Frank nodded, fatigue washing over him. "And Max's retirement." Jenny smiled. "I think that paperwork has mysteriously disappeared. Chief Donovan says Max has earned his place 10 times over." As if understanding. Max's tail thumped against the floor. 3 days later, Frank was released from the hospital with strict orders to rest. Jenny drove him home, Max sitting protectively in the back seat, unwilling to let his partner out of his sight since the shooting. "The department's holding a press conference tomorrow," Jenny informed him as they pulled into his driveway. "Chief wanted you there, but the doctors overruled her." "Probably for the best," Frank admitted. "I've never been good with cameras." "They're calling it the biggest corruption bust in Pinewood's history. Westfield, Blackwood, the Hayes father and son, 2 more officers, and apparently there are more arrests coming." Jenny helped Frank from the car, Max hovering anxiously at his side. "Reynolds' name is being cleared. They're talking about a posthumous commendation. 15 years too late," Frank said quietly. Inside his modest home, Frank eased himself onto the couch, the simple act of walking from the car having drained his energy. Max immediately settled on the floor beside him, maintaining his protective vigil. "You don't have to stay," Frank told Jenny. "I know you got work to do." "Actually, I've been ordered to keep an eye on you," she admitted with a small smile. "Chief's worried you'll try to sneak back to work if left unsupervised." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jenny answered it to find Samuel Cooper standing on the porch, holding a casserole dish. "Thought you might need some real food after hospital slop," the retired detective said gruffly as Jenny invited him in. His weathered face softened at the sight of Frank. "You look like hell." "Sullivan." "Feel like it too," Frank admitted. Cooper set the food down and lowered himself into an armchair. Heard about what happened. Figured it was time I paid a visit to civilization. He reached down to pat Max. Quite a partner you've got. Word is he's the one who broke the whole thing open. He knew something was wrong, Frank confirmed. Kept trying to tell us until we finally listened. Cooper nodded thoughtfully. Dogs have always been better judges of character than people. No agendas, no prejudices, just pure instinct. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about Tom a lot these past few days, wishing he could see this. He made it possible, Frank said. His evidence, his foresight in preserving it, and his partner who never stopped looking, Cooper added, his voice rough with emotion. That's what Tom would have done for me. What any good partner does. Frank's hand found Max's fur, drawing comfort from the solid presence beside him. Yeah, he agreed softly. That's what partners do. The next morning, Frank woke to the sound of his doorbell. Still moving gingerly, he made his way to the entrance. Max at his heels. Opening the door revealed Chief Donovan standing on his porch, holding a folder and looking uncharacteristically solemn. Chief, Frank greeted her with surprise. Shouldn't you be preparing for the press conference? This couldn't wait, she said, stepping inside. Her gaze fell on Max. How's he doing? Better than me, Frank replied. What brings you here? Donovan hesitated, which was unusual for her typically direct manner. Dr. Richards called me yesterday about Max. Something in her tone made Frank's chest tighten. What about him? The blood work they did after the incident at Westfields showed some concerning markers. She wants to run more tests. Frank lowered himself carefully onto the couch, suddenly needing to sit down. What kind of markers? Potentially cancer, Donovan said gently. She can't be sure without further testing, but she's concerned enough that she felt I should know immediately. Frank looked at Max, who sat watching them with those intelligent amber eyes, seemingly unaware that his health was being discussed. The dog appeared perfectly healthy, alert, energetic despite his age. This can't be right, Frank said, his voice hoarse. He's been fine. Better than fine. He just broke open the biggest case in department history. Which is why I wanted to tell you in person. Donovan placed the folder on the coffee table. The department will cover all costs for testing and treatment. Whatever he needs. She paused. Dr. Richards said his behavior these past weeks might actually have been partially explained by this. Sometimes animals sense internal changes before symptoms become visible. Frank struggled to process this information. Are you saying his fixation on the storage room wasn't about the evidence that it was some kind of illness behavior? No, Donovan said firmly. The evidence is real. The case is real. Max found it. No question. But Dr. Richards thinks his persistence, the intensity of his fixation, might have been amplified by physical changes he was experiencing. She leaned forward. In other words, Frank. He knew something was wrong with the case, yes, but possibly with himself, too. Frank reached out for Max, who immediately came to his side, pressing against his leg as if sensing his distress. What's the prognosis if it is cancer? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Donovan counseled. We don't have a diagnosis yet, just concerns. Dr. Richards has cleared her schedule to see him this afternoon. As Chief Donovan departed for the press conference, Frank sat with Max in the quiet house, one hand absently stroking the dog's fur. The possibility of losing his partner, especially now, seemed like a cruel twist of fate. Max had just proved his worth beyond any doubt, forced the department to recognize his exceptional abilities, and now this shadow loomed over his future. "We'll get through this, buddy," Frank promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever happens, we're in it together." Max looked up at him with complete trust, and Frank found himself hoping that whatever instincts had led Max to the evidence in the wall would serve him equally well in the battle that potentially lay ahead. The veterinary clinic was quiet when Frank arrived with Max that afternoon, Jenny having insisted on driving them both. Dr. Valerie Richards had arranged for them to enter through a side door, away from the busy waiting room, a courtesy that Frank deeply appreciated in his current state both physically and emotionally. "Officer Sullivan," Dr. Richards greeted him, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. A woman in her early 40s with prematurely silver-streaked hair. She'd been caring for the department's canine officers for over a decade. "How are you feeling? Should you even be out of bed?" "I'm fine," Frank dismissed, though the pain in his side suggested otherwise. "Let's focus on Max." The examination room was bright and clinical, but Dr. Richards had made efforts to make it less intimidating. Landscape photos on the walls, a comfortable padded bench rather than hard plastic chairs. Max sat calmly, seemingly unperturbed by the environment he'd visited for routine checkups throughout his career. "I've scheduled a comprehensive panel of tests," Dr. Richards explained as she gently examined Max, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Blood work, ultrasound, radiographs, given his age, and the markers in his preliminary blood work. I want to be thorough." Frank watched as Max submitted to the examination with dignified patience. "He seems so normal," he observed. "Energetic, alert. If there's something wrong, he's hiding it well." Dr. Richards nodded. "That's common, especially in working dogs. They're bred to push through discomfort, to focus on the job rather than themselves. It's one of their most admirable qualities, but it can mask serious issues until they're quite advanced." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of tests and waiting. Frank remained by Max's side throughout, speaking softly to him during blood draws, keeping a reassuring hand on his fur during the ultrasound. Jenny stayed in the waiting room, fielding calls from the station where the press conference had generated a media frenzy. Finally, Dr. Richards asked Frank to join her in her office, leaving Max with a veterinary technician who offered the dog treats and gentle praise. "I won't sugarcoat this, Frank," Dr. Richards said once they were seated, using his first name in a departure from her usual professional formality. "The ultrasound confirmed what I suspected. Max has a mass on his spleen, and there are signs of metastasis to his liver." The words hit Frank like physical blows. "Cancer," he said flatly. "Hemangiosarcoma. To be specific, it's aggressive and, unfortunately, common in German shepherds." Her expression was compassionate but honest. "By the time we detect it, it's usually already spread." "What's the treatment? Surgery, chemotherapy?" Frank leaned forward, ignoring the pain from his wound. "Whatever it costs." Dr. Richards held up a hand. "We can remove the spleen, yes. That might buy him some time and improve his quality of life. But with the metastasis already present," she paused. I'm talking months, Frank, not years. The room seemed to close in around him. Outside the window, life continued normally, people walking dogs, birds flying, clouds drifting. How could everything look so unchanged when his world was shattering? "How many months?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Without intervention, probably 2 to 3 months. With surgery and chemotherapy, we might extend that to 6, possibly 8 months. But I have to emphasize, this would be palliative care, not curative." Frank stared at his hands, noticing absently that they were trembling slightly. Max had saved his life at Westfield's estate, had helped bring justice to 3 murdered girls and their families, had proven himself beyond any doubt as an exceptional police dog. And now, when he should be enjoying recognition and perhaps a comfortable semi-retirement, he was facing a death sentence. "Does he know?" Frank asked, the question emerging before he could consider how it sounded. "I mean, is he in pain? Can he sense what's happening?" Dr. Richards didn't dismiss the question. Dogs experience illness differently than we do. They don't have our existential dread about death, but they're remarkably attuned to their bodies. Max likely knows something isn't right, though he wouldn't conceptualize it as cancer or understand its implications. And pain. Probably some discomfort, but not acute pain yet. That will come later, as the disease progresses. She leaned forward. "Frank, one thing I've learned in 20 years of veterinary medicine is that our animals often show us how to face difficult circumstances with grace. Max isn't dwelling on what's happening to him. He's still focused on his job, on you, on what matters to him." Frank nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "We should discuss options." Dr. Richards continued gently. "Surgery could be scheduled as early as tomorrow. The recovery period would be about 2 weeks, during which he'd need to remain quiet, difficult for a working dog." "He'd hate that," Frank murmured, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Being confined, unable to work. Yes, but it might give him more good months, months where he could still enjoy life, even if not at full capacity." The weight of the decision pressed down on Frank. In the field, he made life-or-death choices regularly, but this felt different. This was Max, his partner, his friend, the one constant in his life these past 5 years. "I need to think about it," he finally said. "Talk to the chief about what this means for his service." Dr. Richards nodded. "Of course. But don't wait too long. With this type of cancer, time is precious." When they returned to the examination room, Max greeted Frank with the same enthusiasm he always showed, tail wagging, eyes bright with recognition and affection. Looking at him, no one would guess the truth revealed by the medical imaging that death was growing inside him, stealing his future day by day. Frank knelt, despite his injury, wrapping his arms around Max's sturdy frame, burying his face in the dog's fur to hide the tears that threatened to fall. Max stood patiently, allowing the embrace, perhaps sensing his human's distress. "You're such a good boy," Frank whispered. "The very best." Jenny was waiting when they emerged, rising quickly from her seat in the waiting room. One look at Frank's face told her everything. "Oh no," she said softly. "Cancer," Frank confirmed. the word still feeling foreign on his tongue. Advanced? Months? Not years? Jenny's eyes filled with tears. She'd grown attached to Max during their partnership on the Westfield case, impressed by his intelligence and dedication. What happens now? Surgery tomorrow. If I decide to go that route, then recovery. Maybe chemotherapy. Frank's voice was mechanical, reciting facts to avoid confronting emotions. I need to talk to the chief. The drive home passed in silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. Max sat in the back seat, gazing out the window with his usual alert interest in the passing world, seemingly untroubled by the heavy hearts of his human companions. At Frank's house. Jenny helped him inside, then hesitated at the door. Do you want me to stay or call someone? Frank shook his head. No, but thank you. I think Max and I need some time alone. After she left, Frank moved to his favorite armchair, Max settling at his feet as he always did. From this normal, everyday position, the reality of Dr. Richards's diagnosis seemed impossible to reconcile with the healthy-appearing dog before him. His phone rang, Chief Donovan checking in. He let it go to voicemail. Not ready to share the news, to make it real by speaking it aloud. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting warm light across the living room floor where Max had stretched out, apparently content. Frank watched him, memorizing details he'd taken for granted, the precise pattern of black and tan in his fur, the way one ear sometimes folded slightly at the tip, the rhythm of his breathing as he dozed. This partner who had never let him down, never complained, never failed to give his all, was now facing a battle he couldn't win. The unfairness of it burned in Frank's chest, mixing with grief and helpless anger. Max deserved better. He deserved years of recognition and comfort, not months of decline and pain. The phone rang again, Jenny this time. Again. Frank let it go to voicemail. The world outside could wait. Right now, all that mattered was this room, this moment. This faithful friend who had somehow known that something vital was hidden in a wall and had refused to give up until humans understood. We should have listened to you sooner, Frank said softly. Max lifted his head at the sound of his voice, ears perked attentively. If we had, maybe we would have caught this earlier. Maybe. But there was no point in maybes. The reality was what it was, harsh and unyielding. Tomorrow would bring decisions about surgery and treatment. The days after would bring adjustments and accommodations as Max's condition progressed. For now, though, there was just this quiet room, the afternoon sun, and the partnership that had come to define both their lives, a bond facing its greatest test and its inevitable end. The morning of Max's surgery dawned clear and bright, a perfect late summer day that seemed indifferent to the weight Frank carried as he drove to the veterinary clinic. Max sat in the passenger seat as always, his demeanor calm and trusting. Frank had made his decision after a sleepless night they would fight, give Max every chance at more good days. Chief Donovan was waiting for them outside the clinic, a gesture of support that touched Frank deeply. "Sullivan," she greeted him, her usual brisk manner softened with concern. "How are you holding up?" "Been better," Frank admitted, carefully exiting the car to avoid straining his healing wound. "Didn't expect to see you here, Chief." Where else would I be? She reached down to greet Max, who accepted her attention with dignified appreciation. This officer has earned the department's full support. Inside, Dr. Richards reviewed the surgical procedure once more, her manner professional but kind. We'll remove the spleen and take biopsies of the liver. The surgery itself should take about 2 hours, and we'll keep him overnight for observation. Frank knelt to Max's level, looking into those intelligent amber eyes. You be good, buddy. I'll be right here when you wake up. His voice caught on the last words, despite Dr. Richards' assurances about the routine nature of the surgery. Frank couldn't shake the fear that these might be his final moments with his partner. As Max was led away by a veterinary technician, Chief Donovan placed a steadying hand on Frank's shoulder. Come on. Sitting here worrying won't help either of you. I'll buy you breakfast, and we can discuss what happens next. At a quiet diner a few blocks from the clinic, the chief shared updates on the Westfield case as a distraction from the clock ticking slowly toward noon. The district attorney is building what he calls an airtight case, she reported. Westfield's looking at multiple life sentences. Blackwood and the others involved in the cover-up will face substantial charges as well. Frank nodded, pushing eggs around his plate without appetite. What about Reynolds' death? The investigation has been reopened as a potential homicide. The evidence suggests someone staged his suicide after he hid that lockbox. She paused. The working theory is that he realized how deep the corruption went and didn't know who to trust. He trusted that someone would eventually find his evidence, Frank said quietly. He couldn't have known it would take 15 years, Donovan replied, or that it would be a dog who finally uncovered it. The conversation shifted to Max's future with the department. Obviously, he'll be placed on medical leave, Donovan explained, with full benefits and coverage for all his treatments. When he's recovered enough from surgery, he can return to light duty if his condition allows. Light duty? Frank questioned. Frank. Desk appearances, community outreach, training demonstrations, nothing strenuous, but enough to keep him engaged. Dogs like Max need purpose, even when they're ill. Frank appreciated her understanding. And what about me? I'm supposed to return to active duty next week. I've arranged a temporary reassignment, Donovan said. You'll head up our new cold case unit, desk work mostly, reviewing old files, following up on leads that were previously overlooked. It keeps you in the game while giving you flexibility for Max's appointments and care. The consideration behind this arrangement wasn't lost on Frank. Thank you, Chief. It's not charity. Sullivan, after what you and Max uncovered with the Westfield case, I have a feeling you'll find more buried secrets in our files. She checked her watch. Let's head back. Dr. Richards should have an update soon. They returned to the clinic just as Dr. Richards emerged from the surgical area, still wearing scrubs. Her expression was grave. The surgery was more complicated than anticipated, she began, and Frank felt his heart sink. The splenic mass had ruptured, causing internal bleeding. We've removed the spleen and stopped the hemorrhage. But what we found during the procedure was concerning. More cancer? Frank asked, dreading the answer. Yes. The metastasis to the liver is more extensive than the imaging suggested, and we found additional masses in the lungs and lymphatic system. Dr. Richards' voice was gentle but direct. Frank, this changes the prognosis significantly. We're no longer looking at 6 to 8 months, more like weeks. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Frank's feet. Chief Donovan steadied him with a firm grip on his arm. He's still in recovery now. Dr. Richards continued. But barring complications, you can take him home tomorrow. I'll prescribe medications for pain and to slow the disease progression, but... She paused, choosing her words carefully. It would be best to focus on quality of life now, not length. Frank nodded mechanically, processing this devastating revision to an already grim prognosis. Can I see him? In about an hour. Once he's more stable, I'll have someone come get you. As Dr. Richards departed, Frank sank heavily into a waiting room chair, his wound aching in time with his heartbeat. Weeks, he repeated hollowly. Not months, weeks. Chief Donovan sat beside him, her usual stoic demeanor giving way to evident empathy. I'm so sorry, Frank. They sat in silence for several minutes before Frank spoke again. You know what's killing me. He'll never understand why this is happening, why he feels worse each day, why I can't fix it. His voice broke. He trusts me to take care of him. And I can't stop this. No, Donovan agreed quietly. But you can make whatever time he has left good, comfortable, surrounded by people who appreciate what he's done. When Frank was finally allowed to see Max, he found his partner in a recovery kennel, drowsy from anesthesia but alert enough to recognize him. An IV line delivered fluids and pain medication, and a large shaved area on Max's abdomen revealed the extensive surgical incision. "Hey, buddy," Frank said softly, kneeling beside the kennel. Max's tail thumped weakly against the padding, his eyes struggling to focus through the medication haze. "You did great. Real tough guy." "Huh." Frank stayed until visiting hours ended, sitting beside the kennel, sometimes talking quietly to Max, sometimes just being present. The veterinary staff brought him coffee and offered sympathetic smiles, but didn't rush him out. The next morning, Jenny arrived to drive them home, having prepared Frank's house with a comfortable bed for Max in the living room and stocked the refrigerator with easily prepared meals. "The whole department pitched in," she explained as they carefully settled Max in the back seat, the dog still groggy from medication. "Everyone wants to help." At home, Max moved slowly to his new bed. Clearly in pain despite the medications, he settled with a deep sigh, watching Frank with eyes that seemed to hold questions no human could answer. Over the next few days, a stream of visitors arrived, officers from the department bringing food and offering assistance. Samuel Cooper with fishing stories that somehow made both Frank and Max more relaxed. Even Sarah Collins, Emma's mother, who sat quietly beside Max's bed and thanked him for bringing her daughter's killer to justice. A week after the surgery, Frank received a call from Chief Donovan. "We've had an interesting development," she said without preamble. The techs examining evidence from Westfield's estate found traces of a specialized poison in several items, including dog treats. Frank's attention sharpened. Poison. A compound sometimes used to euthanize animals. Slow-acting, accumulates in the system over time. The forensic team found similar residue on Max's water bowl from your office and on some of his toys. The implication hit Frank like a physical blow. Someone was poisoning Max deliberately. It appears so. We're testing samples from his blood work to confirm. But Dr. Richards says it could explain some of his symptoms. possibly even have accelerated the cancer's progression. Who would, Frank began. Then understanding dawned. Officer Hayes. He had access to my office, to Max's things. That's our theory, Donovan confirmed. He must have realized Max was fixated on the storage room, suspected what might be hidden there. Poisoning Max would discredit his behavior, make it seem like cognitive decline rather than a legitimate discovery. The rage that surged through Frank was white-hot. That bastard poisoned my dog to protect himself, to protect Westfield. We're adding attempted murder of a police K-9 to the charges against him, Donovan assured him. But Frank, there's something else. Dr. Richards believes that if we can identify the exact compound, there might be treatments to counteract its effects. It won't cure the cancer, but it might reduce some symptoms, possibly even extend his timeline. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked in Frank's chest. Not hope for a miracle cure, he was too realistic for that, but hope for more good days, for less pain, for a little more time with his partner. That evening, as he sat beside Max's bed, gently stroking the dog's fur as he dozed, Frank found himself thinking about the cruel irony of the situation. Max had persistently tried to reveal a hidden truth, not knowing that his very persistence was making him a target. Yet even while being poisoned, even while cancer grew inside him, he had never wavered in his determination to be heard. "You're the best detective in the department," Frank told him softly. "And the best partner anyone could ask for." Max opened his eyes at the sound of Frank's voice, his gaze clear and present despite everything. In that moment, Frank made a silent promise whatever time they had left. He would ensure it honored the extraordinary dog who had given so much in service to truth. The memorial service for Detective Thomas Reynolds was held on a crisp September morning, 15 years after his death. The Pinewood Police Department turned out in full dress uniforms, badges wrapped with black bands. Frank stood at the edge of the gathering, Max beside him wearing his formal K-9 vest adorned with the medals and commendations he'd earned throughout his career. In the 2 weeks since the discovery of the poisoning, Max had undergone specialized treatments to counteract the toxins in his system. Dr. Richards had been cautiously optimistic about the results while the cancer continued its inevitable progression. Max had shown improved energy and appetite, granting them what she called better days, if not more days. Chief Donovan approached the podium, her silver hair gleaming in the morning sunlight. "Today, we right a wrong that has stood for 15 years. Detective Thomas Reynolds did not take his own life in disgrace, as was once believed. He was murdered for his integrity, for his refusal to abandon justice, and for his determination to protect evidence that would eventually bring a killer to account." Frank watched as Reynolds' daughter, now in her 30s, accepted the posthumous Medal of Valor on her father's behalf, tears streaming down her face. Beside her stood her mother, Reynolds' widow, whose vindication had come far too late. After the ceremony, people gathered in small groups, sharing memories of Reynolds and discussing the shocking revelations that had rocked Pinewood. The Westfield case had expanded beyond a small-town murder investigation into one of the largest corruption probes in the state's history. With connections reaching into the county government, the judicial system, and even state-level politics, Sarah Collins approached Frank, kneeling to greet Max with gentle hands. "They found Melissa," she said, her voice carrying the complex mixture of grief and relief that Frank had come to recognize in victims' families. They're bringing her home next week. All 3 girls will finally rest in the same cemetery." "I'm glad," Frank said simply. What more could be said about such a bittersweet resolution? Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "How is he doing?" she asked, nodding toward Max. "Good days and bad days," Frank replied. "Today's a pretty good one," as if to confirm this assessment. Max stood slightly straighter, his attention shifting to a woman making her way across the lawn toward them, in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She moved with purpose. "Officer Sullivan?" she asked, stopping before them. "I'm Lily Patterson." Frank recognized the name immediately, the girl who had escaped the Starlight Killer, whose testimony had been insufficient without the physical evidence that disappeared. "Ms. Patterson, it's an honor to meet you." Lily's gaze moved to Max, her expression softening. "Chief Donovan told me about your partner, about what he found." She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with Max, who regarded her with his characteristic intelligence. "Thank you," she said to the dog, her voice thick with emotion. "I spent 15 years wondering if I'd imagined things, if I was wrong about what I saw. You proved I wasn't." Max stepped forward, gently pressing his head against her hand in a gesture that seemed almost like comfort. Lily smiled through her tears, scratching behind his ears. "He's good at knowing who needs him," Frank said quietly. "I heard about his condition," Lily said, rising to her feet. "I'm so sorry." Frank nodded, accepting her sympathy. The news of Max's cancer and his heroic role in breaking the case had spread throughout Pinewood, turning the German Shepherd into something of a local legend. Children left hand-drawn cards at the station. A local bakery had created Max's Treats, donating the proceeds to the department's K-9 unit. Even the Pinewood Gazette had run a front-page feature titled "The Dog Who Brought Justice." As the gathering began to disperse, Chief Donovan joined them. "Sullivan, when you have a moment, I'd like to discuss the new cold case unit with you." She smiled at Max. "And with your partner, of course." The cold case unit had evolved from a temporary assignment into a permanent division within the department, inspired by Max's discovery of the Westfield evidence. Already, they'd identified 3 additional cases with potential connections to the corruption network Westfield had built. "I've got time now," Frank offered. "Good. And after that, I'm hoping you'll join us at the station. There's something we'd like to show you both." When they arrived at the Pinewood Police Department an hour later, Frank was surprised to find the main lobby filled with officers, administrative staff, and even several city officials. A large object stood in the center, covered with a blue cloth. "What's going on?" he asked Jenny, who had appeared at his side. "You'll see," she replied with a smile. "Max, come." Max followed Jenny to the center of the room, Frank trailing behind, confused but intrigued. Chief Donovan stepped forward, addressing the gathered crowd. "Today, we honor not only the memory of Detective Reynolds, but also the extraordinary service of one of Pinewood's finest officers." She nodded to Jenny, who pulled away the cloth to reveal a beautiful bronze plaque mounted on a wooden base. It read, "The Max Sullivan K-9 Training Center dedicated to the German Shepherd who found truth behind walls, and to all K-9 officers past, present, and future, who serve with unwavering loyalty and courage." Frank stared at the plaque, momentarily speechless. Max sat beside him, tail sweeping the floor in slow, dignified arcs. "The city council approved the funding yesterday," Chief Donovan explained. "We're converting the East Wing into a state-of-the-art K-9 training facility. Officer Martinez will head the program." Jenny beamed. "We'll train dogs to search for evidence in cold cases, specialized skills that Max showed us were possible." Frank knelt beside Max, emotion making it difficult to speak. "Hear that, buddy? Your legacy?" Max looked up at him with those wise amber eyes that had seen what no human could, that had persisted when everyone doubted, that had brought justice to victims long forgotten. In them, Frank saw not just the pain of what was ending, but the pride of what would continue. As sunlight streamed through the station windows, casting warm patterns across the newly dedicated plaque, Frank realized that while time might be taking his partner from him, nothing could diminish what Max had given to Pinewood or what he had given to Frank, a lesson in persistence, in loyalty, and in speaking for those who could no longer speak for themselves. As we age, our deepest connections often come from the silent companions who ask nothing but give everything. Max's story reminds us that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from those who speak the loudest, but from those who observe with quiet devotion. When life has weathered us with disappointments, careers ending, health declining, loved ones departing, we recognize in Max's unwavering determination our own struggles to be heard and valued in our golden years. His legacy speaks to what many of us fear most, not that our lives will end, but that our lifetime of knowledge and experience might be dismissed as outdated or irrelevant, like Max scratching at that wall. We, too, have truths to share before our time runs out. His story reassures us that persistence matters, that what we've learned through decades of living is worth fighting to communicate. Even when others are quick to attribute our concerns to cognitive decline, and perhaps most powerfully, Max reminds us that our worth isn't measured by how many days we have left, but by how courageously we use them, leaving footprints that continue to guide others long after our own journey ends.